video number 2, so I'm just discussing the problems with the neurodiversity paradigm, how the variability of autism poses real problems for the neurodiversity paradigm. And I was just saying how, yeah, psychologically there's a great deal of variability, but there's also a great deal of variability at the biological level as well. So further to that, evidence also shows that different neurological features are associated with different traits. So far from so it's not the case that the same neurology is responsible for the whole package, which is what we call autism. Each trait or each symptom of autism is associated with a different neurological underpinning. So these traits are separable from one another. It's just that more often than you expect by chance, they go hand in hand, and it's only when they go hand in hand that it's called autism. They can occur on their own, and even when, like, say, you could have an isolated trait, I don't know, say someone could have really extreme repetitive routinized behaviours, I think they're called like RRBIs, something like that, extreme routine repetitive behaviours, interests, activities and so on. Someone could have that someone could just have that feature in isolation, and it could be really disabling for them. They wouldn't be diagnosed with autism if that's the only feature they have, but even on its own that could be extremely disabling for someone. I don't know what they'd be diagnosed with, maybe some other psychiatric condition. They might probably be diagnosed with something because it may well make them feel mentally distressed or something. I don't know, what might really limit their life, so they might well get some other, well, I suppose it depends on the extent to which it would limit their life. But yeah, it wouldn't be diagnosed with autism if you only had that feature on its own, but it can occur on its own. It's just that very frequently it will also occur with social problems. My guess is that even if someone does, if it occurs on its own, someone still might have a bit more social problems than you'd expect to see. Like, they might not necessarily be the extent of autism, but there probably will be a bit more socially, have slightly more social problems than you'd expect, because there's this really strong overlap between those two traits. They're still trying to work out why exactly, but there is this really strong overlap between those two traits. But they're not necessarily caused by the same thing. It's just that they tend to go hand in hand. So there might be it might be that the genes or the neurological underpinnings for one has a very strong interaction with the neurological underpinnings or genes or whatever for the other traits, which is why they very often go hand in hand, but they don't have to go hand in hand. So there's relatively little overlap between the genes responsible for the different elements of autistic phenotype, and this suggests that individuals labelled autistic may simply be those in whom traits we associate with autism happen to coincide. And as I said, the traits can occur on their own. It's just they very often occur together, and it's only when they occur together that you get autism. But the genes themselves there's little overlap between the genes responsible for the different traits. So different genes are responsible for the different parts of autism, essentially. So this questions the utility of a single diagnosis. And that's why we tend nowadays to talk about the autisms in the plural, to show that it's not one condition. That what we label autism is a massive... It's really, autism is in a sense always has to be in inverted commas, because it's not one thing, it's the autisms. I guess a bit like in schizophrenia, I guess would be an analogy. There's schizophrenias, like someone could have paranoid schizophrenia, I don't know, there's just loads of different types, isn't there, catatonic, whatever. They might only have a very, very, I don't know, the links between them, we're not really sure. They might even have different causes, so we don't know. But it's clearly not one thing. So the idea here is that different individuals have different biological paths to autism. There are different biological paths. I completely agree. Autism consists of a collection of fractionable characteristics, in other words, you can separate them, that co-occur at above chance frequency but can also be found in isolation. So the different symptoms that define autism do not proceed from the same cause. They do not proceed from the same cause. So Waterhouse goes further, arguing that not only do the characteristics that define autism lack a common cause, They share causal underpinnings with many other conditions, including those that are described as co-occurring with autism. For example, intellectual disability, ADHD, perceptual problems, motor disorders, epilepsy. I'd also add OCD. I think that is very likely to be common, well, it stands to reason for me as someone with both. It's obvious that they are basically interlinked. I mean, you can't really separate the two. But anyway, in a person's brain, that is, you know. It's all part of the same disorder. So what collection of additional symptoms you get that aren't part of the autism core but nevertheless might share the same cause obviously depends on what genes you inherit and what risk factors you're exposed to. So it's not a single disorder, nor is it a distinct set of disorders. Rather, it is a set of symptoms associated with many different conditions. So, I mean, even the core of autism, the RRBIs, routine, repetitive activities, behaviours, interests, and the social difficulties, are not actually unique to autism. In isolation, like I just said, they can occur in other conditions. It's only when they come together that they're called autism. And that's the autistic core, isn't it? The so-called triad of impairments, as they used to call it. But that's what we call autism, but and that's a core, that's autism, but that triad is quite arbitrary. It's just that those symptoms come together more often than you'd expect by chance. They can kind of be grouped together as a symptom cluster, but they can have different causes. They can be isolated from one another, they can occur on their own, and also they usually, 9 times out of 10, occur with other symptoms from other psychiatric conditions that research is showing can share the same causes. Okay, so that really does blow out this whole pure autism idea out of the water. It is simple. It's a fallacy. Pure autism does not exist. It's just a phantom. So yes, autism is not a disorder that you can separate from other conditions. I completely agree. Disbanding a concept of autism as a unitary disorder should involve the acceptance of a totality of an individual's symptoms as part of the disorder of that individual. Exactly it. So you can't separate my OCD symptoms from my autism. They come from the same pathology. The very way I fixate on things that causes me so much anxiety is because of executive dysfunction, the problem of not being able to stop a thought. That same problem means I can get intensively obsessed with certain interests. It can be positive, but it can also cause me a great deal of anxiety when it results in OCD. You cannot separate the two. These are all coming from the same pathological process for me. It's all part of the same disorder in my brain. And that research I've just said is backing me on this. See, it's not just something I'm saying. I mean, I've felt this for a long time because I just feel it intuitively. It makes sense to me. Separating them out just seems so arbitrary. We do it, psychiatrists obviously have to separate the conditions. Obviously, they have to do that. But it's important to understand that although we label this autism, we label this OCD, these symptom clusters in the person's brain, they are actually related. They come from someone with intellectual disability and autism. The intellectual disability is not separate to their autism. Again, for them, it's all part of the same disorder. And it just depends what genes you inherit and what the environmental stuff you're exposed to. It's all part of the same disorder in a person's brain. So calling part of that autism and giving the rest a different name is useful to some extent for psychiatrics, but actually when we're looking at research and other things, it's more important to actually look at the symptoms and symptom clusters and to look at whether or not certain symptoms are related to one another on a causal level, as opposed to say just being very strict about what is autism, what is OCD, what is ID and so on, because there's going to be relationships between them depending on the individual. Okay, so I'm going to carry on talking about this next time, because I've still got loads to talk about here. Okay, so thank you for watching.